Hello, everyone. Dr. Christine Smith back with a wonderful interview for you today with Dr. Aruna Tummala, who is a holistic psychiatrist, which I love finding. And she also has a whole background in Ayurveda, and she combines this with functional medicine to create a holistic approach to mental health. And I think that is just because we run into a lot of scenarios where there's just some gaps that need to be covered and things that are being missed. I was talking to a psychiatrist the other day who had said that in school they were taught that PTSD wasn't correlated with depression, which I found to be super interesting. So thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Tummala. I would love to talk a little bit deeper about these concepts because I know I've had you on before. We had a wonderful discussion, but I think there's a way that we can dive deeper. And I'd love if you could just remind everyone a little bit about yourself and your very unique background and how you fell in love with this field.
Absolutely. Oh, Christine, it's always a pleasure to see you and have these wonderful conversations with you. Thank you again for having me, and hello to everyone out there. So you were talking about, let me actually start with my background. I'm Dr. Aruna Tummala. I am a psychiatrist, both certified in adult and geriatric, and also both certified in integrative and holistic medicine. And out of all the modalities I was introduced to, I chose functional medicine and Ayurveda as the way for me to understand all about health, not about disease, but all about health and how to live a healthy life. So it was a complete, I mean, after so many years of medical education, I had to unlearn everything. But my journey started in 2013 and in the holistic world. And the first recipient of this was myself. I was able to heal my own health issues. And that's what really prompted me to, I really dig deep into the field of psychiatry from a holistic perspective. And I was working for a hospital, but I had to quit my job. And in 2016, I started my practice. And what really, I mean, psychiatry has been my passion from way back in med school. And in India, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, we start medical education soon after your 12th grade. And it was kind of expected of me. I'm one of three. My older sister went into engineering. I was a second in line, and it was expected that I would become a doctor. And, I've always been a good student, so it wasn't difficult for me to get into medical education. But it was only when I when I did my psychiatry rotation in my second year that interest sparked. Simply because, at that young age, the concept of somebody seeing things and hearing things outside of their lived experience was so foreign. The first time I read about schizophrenia as a teenager, please don't judge me on this, I started giggling. Like, really? How can, because it was so foreign. And that was kind of the culture I grew up in. It was very sheltered, very secluded. So the first time I read about schizophrenia, I really found it so amusing that people could have a full movie going on in their own mind and believe in it. And that sparked my interest. And then, I truly believe that we are guided so much by our teachers. And in internship, I had a wonderful psychiatrist who gave not only the psychoanalytic perspective that Freud is famous for, but also the neurobiological perspective. And all of this is in India. So and I will tell you, when I did my first residency, it was more holistic than my second residency here in the US. I mean, by the time I started my residency here in 2005, mind and body divorce was complete. Whereas my education in India, if there was a patient that came in with first episode psychosis, I was expected to do a full medical and neuro exam and also get a CT scan of the head just to rule out things like tuberculosis in the brain or, being a tropical country, worm infestations could also manifest. And I remember working with a woman in her 60s who actually had neurosyphilis, but she was originally thought of as having schizophrenia. So with that background, lumbar puncture. So it was a very medical, holistic in that way that we were ruling out medical causes, but the whole mind, body, spirit was still missing. And the true essence of holism, which is that there is no difference between the mind and body, was still missing. Partly because of where the culture was, I would say, because, again, my residency in India was from 1999 to 2002. And one of my professors, he actually, one of his, we were required to do a study and publish it as part of our MD degree. So we had to publish an original study. And one of the seniors, she was studying the effect of a specific form of yoga, which is known as Sudarshan Kriya Yoga, and the effect of Sudarshan Kriya Yoga on depression. And it was actually a randomized placebo-controlled trial, not placebo-controlled. They were actually controlling it with amitriptyline, which was one of the main antidepressants that was in use in India at that time. It's a tricyclic antidepressant. And when the study findings came out that Sudarshan Kriya Yoga was just as beneficial in a shorter amount of time without the side effects, I just poo-pooed it. I'm like, what, you're breathing and your depression gets better? That was the state of my own awareness and education. And truly so, I all the health struggles I've had, or even personal life challenges that I've had, including experiencing trauma in my childhood life and my personality, the way it developed, all of them I see as stepping stones that the universe placed, and every question that I was trying to unravel and understand for myself, I awakened in the process, went from somebody that was actually highly anxious, unconscious, and living life according to the scriptures of society rather than living life according to my own authenticity. And, so no surprise, I had Hashimoto's. I couldn't express myself, be authentic, and that definitely affects our throat center. So this has been my journey. And then once I switched over to holistic psychiatry, I've been able to kind of see that what I was able to do for myself is replicable, reliably replicable when people follow the formula. And on this, I know you and I, we agree. It's, we both are very much in sync about the root causes. And if I may, I would like to tackle what you said, that another psychiatrist said that PTSD and depression are, oh my gosh.
Oh, he disagrees with that. It's just what he was taught in school.
Oh,
And
okay.
I remember the first time that we
Yeah.
spoke, I found it fascinating that you already had your medical degree from India, and then you came here and you had to redo it. So you're basically got 2 doctorates. And when you came here, you went to go do a physical exam on your patient,
Yeah.
and the teacher stopped you
Yeah.
and said, "What are you doing?" Which I found bonkers. But yeah, I'd love to hear your comments around PTSD and depression and what you learned, because when he told me that in school he was taught that they weren't connected, my question is how? Like, how could they not be?
Yeah. A lot of this is, and the reason, even for me, I mean, I went along with all of that, right? Until a certain point in time, until, so that's why I said, it's unfortunate that we start medical education so young in India, because I was 17 when I started medical education, and I was 23 when I started my psychiatric residency, but did not have any practical experience of life at all. Maybe a theoretical understanding, but this is not to say that patients should not go to young people, but we definitely learn a lot in the process of living life. And there is something about maturity and wisdom that only lived experience can give us, but lived experience where we are asking these questions of ourselves. And so what happens in psychiatric education, even to now, I mean, it's a completely corrupted system. And and in both residencies, all I wanted to do, the first residency was not so bad. I mean, my institute, NIMHANS, I really think of it as a temple, because the education I got there was relatively free of pharmaceutical industry influence. And we were really taught that patient service is service to God. So, and a lot of role models from that institute. It's my oasis that I like to go back and dip from time to time. But the pharmacy influence, industry influence is very strong, from diagnosis to treatment, and beyond these two extremes as well. So the diagnostic system itself is tainted. And as we become more, as we continue to practice in the field of psychiatry, we actually see that we cannot put people into the boxes that are designed in DSM-4. We are very more complex than that. And also a very egregious example of corruption is that when I was in 1999, when I started psychiatric residency, PTSD, the duration of PTSD was 6 months or something like that. Bereavement, actually, forgive me, 6 months, 6 to 12 months was still considered normal bereavement. That, especially depending on the depth of the relationship and the amount of grief, you should allow for normal grief and bereavement to last up to 6 to 12 months. And then here in the last 10 years, or even within the last 10 years, the definition of PTSD changed, and also the definition of bereavement changed. So normal bereavement. So if people are not able to overcome the grief in a very short amount of time, I think it's like 3 months or something. Forgive me, I don't read DSM anymore. I don't ascribe to that anymore. I think it's 3 months, maybe 6 months. So if you are not out of bereavement in 3 to 6 months' time, you can now be labeled with depression. And you don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to be a physician. Just ask yourself as a human being, does that make sense? It doesn't. It absolutely does not. And I do believe that at some point when people are not able to come out of that grief reaction and it impacts them in a manner that is now proving to be unhealthy for them, yes, we have to intervene, but I wouldn't say that they're now major depressive disorder.
Yeah.
I now come to understand this from a very psycho-spiritual perspective. And energy systems, they're stuck in the lower energy centers. They're stuck in survival mode, sympathetic versus parasympathetic. And even in understanding these problems in this lens, so if you say, oh, now it is depression, what's in my arsenal? An antidepressant and psychotherapy. But if I say this is a psycho-spiritual problem, this is about getting stuck in the lower survival energy centers, or if I say it's sympathetic versus parasympathetic, then my arsenal opens up. It's about, yeah.
Oh, no, I was going to say, I have found so many times that when I actually do lab testing on people, when they are struggling with those symptoms, whether or not they've been like classified by the DSM, they usually have some adrenal fatigue going on. And that is often tied to being stuck in those lower energy survival centers, because if you haven't gotten to process your grief, and I think a lot of people think of grief as just, processing someone passing or dying, which, like, yes, definitely. Grief can also happen when a life that you were expecting no longer occurs, or after an assault and you have to somehow get through that, or having something just not turn out the way that you expected. So grief doesn't always have to be associated around death. And I think it's a huge process for when you've kind of lost trust in your environment and in the universe and in things around you. And then that keeps you stuck in those lower energy centers of survival. So everything that you're addressing, I think, is huge.
Yeah, trust and the sympathetic arousal is really a sign of not feeling safe in our body and in our environment, and in our hearts, not feeling safe in our heart, body, and in our environment. So it's we are in agreement. And yes, there are multiple ways of looking at this. So if you remove the modern psychiatric practice of chemical imbalance and these diagnostic categories, then what we will see is that there's so much more that we can look at it from the lens of the body. What's adrenal fatigue, as you mentioned, methylation gene polymorphisms, and another favorite common topic that we like to talk about, mole toxicity. And yeah.
We have so much to dive into. I'm really excited. I want to address any questions that came in just as they come in, because I love when people get to participate. And someone just signed on and said, I just spent an hour looking for a therapist. Man, I feel like I was meant to sign on. So that's perfect. And then there's another question earlier asking about, let's see. What do we think about doing brain mapping and neurofeedback when it comes to anxiety and depression? So maybe we can just comment on that a little bit, because our next question that we're going to dive into anyway is like, let's discuss the current state of our mental health care practice and being licensed on multiple philosophies, like what's your take on things in this field, which we're kind of addressing a little bit,
Yeah.
but then we're going to dive into like what changes would you want to see in how mental health is analyzed and treated. And so this is a good question to kind of start with, and then I'd love to dive into your opinions on mold toxicity, environmental exposures, and anything else that you want to start commenting on, and we can go from there. And anyone listening, please feel free to ask questions. It's so much more fun when we get to make this meaningful to you.
Yes. Okay, so, oh God, I lost my
So we
train of thought.
started
So,
about what do you think of neurofeedback,
brain mapping
anxiety,
and
depression, and brain mapping?
yeah. So all of these techniques, I mean, there are many roads that lead to Rome. So neurofeedback is a really good technique. But what I would like to let people know is that we have to have this holistic approach, because we are not just the brain and we are not just the energy. We are actually mind, body, spirit. We are all of that. And if you understand, I mean, if from a quantum physics and Ayurvedic lens, it's energy that is giving rise to, it's the field that's giving rise to matter. And I would actually like to share with people, there is a theory in yoga and Ayurvedic science. It's called the Pancha Kosha theory. Pancha means five, and Kosha means sheath. And the ancient rishis, the seers, the way they envisioned the human body as having five layers. The outermost layer, it's called Annamaya Kosha. Anna means food. So basically what it means is that which is made up of matter, of food, and water and minerals and all. So basically it's the physical body. Then one layer beneath that is the Pranamaya Kosha. Prana refers to the vital energy, vital force. In chiropractic, we talk about the same thing. It's the energy that animates the body, the material body. And without prana, there is no life, there is no matter disintegrates without energy. So this is the pranamaya kosha, or the energy body. Then the third layer is the manomaya kosha. And actually in pranamaya kosha, we talk about the in Ayurveda, they say there are 72,000 energy channels in the body, very, very similar to acupuncture and the meridians that are described. I think it's the number is the same. The energy points on the body as described in Ayurveda is very much similar to acupuncture points as well. Then the third layer is the manomaya kosha. Mano means mind. So this is where it's the repository of our thoughts, emotions, cognitive schema, everything to do with the mental body. That is in the third layer. The fourth layer is the Vijnanamaya kosha. Vijnana basically means the knowledge of discernment, the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff. And the fourth layer is actually Anandamaya kosha. Ananda means bliss. It's the bliss body. So in any time, and this Panchakosha theory, or the five sheath theory, can be applied to somebody who's experiencing life in its full, and also applied to somebody who is going through any kind of stress, mental or physical stress or chemical stress. And I found it useful because I like to use this theory. So it's not just about the energy body. So it's not just about neurofeedback. But, and I've actually found that because with herbs and supplements, we can immediately, herbs and supplements and even food is medicine. And the way food acts not only provides that material matter for the body to rebuild itself, but food also has energy. So with food, we are actually addressing both the first layer, the matter body, and the energy body. So, and then, of course, and really in practice to what I've seen, when we address the food, the matter and the energy body, only then psychotherapy actually takes hold, which is the mental body. Because the stress comes down, any time you have to overcome a negative emotion, we are using up vitamin B, vitamin D, probably some iron, because all of this is to do with the adrenals, and adrenals are high energy consumption organs. And so anytime you have to sit down and you have to feel that emotion and overcome that, allow for that sympathetic response of tears and breathing and all of that to happen, we are expending tremendous amount of energy. So ATP, mitochondria, all of this comes into play. So when we are taking care of the matter body, energy body, then the mental body. Once these three things, and of course it is practice with the mental body. You overcome, choose yourself, speak your truth, initially it'll happen in an aggressive manner. Then we go into that assertive manner, and then we go into the loving manner. So when these three things happen, then the Vijnanamaya, or the discernment body, awakens. And then that's when we are able to see that this duality of good, bad, evil, moral, black, white, everything kind of, we move from that space of duality to wholeness, and we move away from polarity to wholeness. So, and this is also, in the spiritual lens, we say it's the awakening of the third eye. And, so you really cannot remove the spirit from mind and body. And then once we are able to and Vijnanamaya Kosha helps us to come to that place of oneness and wholeness, away from duality and polarity. And that's when forgiveness, gratitude, and love becomes our innate nature. And as we practice those higher qualities, and these now, naturally, we are moving from the survival energy centers, the lower three energy centers, up to the heart center, and from there to the higher centers. If the person is interested, you can stay in the heart center and don't do anything else. Your life is going to be magical. Your health is going to be magical. But and for somebody that is interested, you can then move up the chain to the higher energy centers, and you keep working mainly through meditation and introspective practices. And you will see that life becomes blissful, not because you're not facing any challenges, but because you have overcome that. The challenges, good and bad, become the same to you. And so that blissfulness comes from within, not from the outside. So this is kind of the concept that I use, and I do explain this in therapy, and I am a facilitator. Like in Ayurveda, we physicians are nothing but facilitators. My job is to enliven your healing processes. So I'm just a placebo facilitator, is how I should best describe myself.
I love getting to talk to you. That was such a beautiful explanation of some really complex, high-level concepts, integrating Ayurveda with, we call it traditional medicine right now. I'm gonna call it more industrial medicine, conventional medicine, and then also understanding frequency and energy and the upcoming research on the brain and how, depending on the frequency we emit, it literally changes the chemistry in our body. And these are a lot of the studies that Dr. Joe Dispenza is doing, which I know you're doing a study with him as well as a practitioner, which is phenomenal. Like, I hope more practitioners get into that work and come to understand this, because, as you were mentioning earlier, like if we come back to tools, right? You talked about neurofeedback as a tool, and I think that's a very good way to think about it. It's like we have all of these different tools, and it's very rare that one thing is the answer. And one thing may work better for somebody than for somebody else. And someone had asked on here, like, hey, do we have any recommendations for hormone-dependent depression? And my answer was, I hope you listen to the rest of this, because it is very rare that that is the one single cause of depression. It is a piece of the puzzle. And I find hormones are signaling molecules between cells. So if the signals are messed up, instead of only working on the signals, we need to figure out why they're messed up. And so this can come from a variety of things, everything from the mold that we talked about, which we can dive into in a minute, to gut health, to grief. Someone had mentioned that their son has been grieving the death of their father for a number of years. And that's usually someone who's caught in like a little bit of a cycle. And like I've even worked with death doulas at different points, and they'll take people through exercises where they get to actually complete the life cycle of their grief, and actually not just feel the feeling, but move through this almost imaginary scenario of how things would have played out. And when our mind gets to complete that life cycle, suddenly we can start to exit the trauma state. But in all of this, as she was saying, we need the building blocks, and we need the resources, and we need the nutrition that helps our neurotransmitters turn over. So a lot of the times what I'll see if people are using antidepressants is like, yes, it increases the level of your neurotransmitters, but there's this feeling where they're like, it's just not quite working. And there's also been a meta study done reviewing like SSRIs and the effects of serotonin. And the main effect and benefit is actually the anti-inflammatory benefits. So we're starting to reevaluate how these neurotransmitters are actually functioning in the brain. And you can increase the levels of neurotransmitters, but if you don't have the vitamins and minerals to recycle them and process them and produce them correctly, it's only going to create disruption in the body. And then it's a little bit tricky when someone's on a medication and all of the regulations say don't take any nutrition with this medication. So
Oh,
now you
yeah.
have this medication that's affecting neurotransmitters, but you don't have any of the nutrition to support the surrounding mechanisms. Our body is so much more complex than
Yes.
individual neurotransmitters. So I would love to dive into kind of the physiology and your understanding a bit, because I know like you're one of the only psychiatrists I know that checks for mold poisoning, which I think is incredibly important. I've been through it myself. My body's sensitive to it. And, I encountered some that had like grown in the bathroom the other day, and I didn't know, but I just realized, I was like, you know what? I'm just off today. Like I was very like motivated yesterday and positive, and then today I'm doubting myself and having all of these like kind of negative mindsets. And then I found it and I was like, oh, okay, that's probably why. And then I removed it from the environment, and like over the next 2 days, I felt substantially better. And a lot of people don't know
Mm,
that
yes.
environmental toxins can affect you like this, and it's hard to find unless you've been through it. So with all of this, yeah, like what is your opinion in just changing how you want things to be analyzed, and how do you approach it in your practice? Because I know you've even developed a whole program called Psychiatry 2.0,
2.0.
which takes
Yes.
these things into account.
Correct, correct. So if so going back to the neurotransmitter hypothesis, neurochemical imbalance, Joanna Moncrief actually did a 70-year meta-analysis of all the studies that were published on serotonin and depression. And there have been studies with regard to dopamine and schizophrenia as well. So a really good book for people to read is Anatomy of an Epidemic by Robert Whitaker, who's a science journalist. And this is the best psychiatric literature review, psychiatric studies literature review. And whether it is bipolar, schizophrenia, ADHD, and depression trauma, he has shown that all these classes of medications actually worsen the neurochemistry in the brain. They don't help at all. They worsen it. That's one thing to keep in mind. And I also remember studying way back in almost 10 years ago now. There's when anthropologists, when they study the manifestation of what is the evolutionary significance of depression and all, and is there really a chemical imbalance? In fact, what they have seen is that the relative reduction of serotonin in the frontal lobe is actually to enhance the serotonin production in the brainstem, in the ascending reticular activating system. And this is because nutrition is not providing enough neurotransmitters, enough building blocks to make the neurotransmitters, or there are genetic predispositions, or there is toxicity in that person. So these are the reasons why, out of its infinite intelligence, our brains are choosing to sacrifice serotonin in the frontal lobe. But that consequently makes us feel sad, amotivated, yes, no doubt. But the answer of trying to force the frontal lobe to make it actually is detrimental, because now it's taking away the very limited resources, especially as you said, without replenishing amino acids, tyrosine especially, or replenishing the methylated B vitamins, or making sure that homocysteine is low. All of this, so really, and from when I read that article, what I came to see, and I'm very visual, and I will share this imagery. I began to see neurotransmitters are slave drivers. And if you can imagine slaves not being fed, but expected to mine whatever they're changed to the machines, and somebody's kind of tired and falling down, and then the slave driver comes and whips the guy to push whatever he's having to push. That's the imagery that I kind of saw when I read that article, and that's what we are doing. So if there is no actual neurochemical imbalance, we have to see that our body does not do anything that is wasteful or not necessary. So if we experience any illness episode, it is because that is the need of the hour, which are the infinite wisdom of our intelligent body has come to decide. So then we have to ask, okay, why? And same thing in temper tantrums in children. Children are not trying to make our life difficult. There is a need that is not being met, and in the same way, we have to ask ourselves, what is the need here? Is there an unmet need, or is there something toxic or noxious influence that we need to remove? And if we approach in this way, then we will find answers. There was something else that you said, Christine. I mean, so many, as you're triggering so many
No, no
pathways
worries.
in my brain.
I love our discussions here. So we were kind of talking about neurotransmitters, and then we were talking about nutrients, and then also environmental effects that things can have. Everything from
Correct.
a environmental toxin such as mold or fungus, or if you work in an industry where you're exposed to heavy metals or chemicals, and that's more common than you think. Or even, these days
You
it's
don't
tricky. Like if you're
have to be.
no,
You
like
don't
even
have
if
to
you're
be working in
playing
these
at the park
industries.
and some
Yes.
big truck comes by and sprays the park or sprays the grass and you're there barefoot, you're now absorbing pesticides. And it's not to say
Yes.
that you can't correct this. It's just an awareness that we're bringing to our world today of the fact that these toxins can significantly affect your mental health. And someone had asked about everything from MTHFR to insomnia. And I said that our question would be, why are you having insomnia versus
Yes.
what antidepressant will fix your insomnia? Because
Correct.
you can't replenish your body if you're not sleeping. So, but just for ease of the question, let's bring it right back to kind of environmental
Yeah.
toxins, how this can disrupt our body chemistry, and how our gut can be involved in all of this.
Yeah. So anything that is non-natural, that has been ultra processed, and this can be food, ultra processed food behaves like a toxin in our body. And I mean, I had my 12-year-old was actually, it was her birthday, and she got, so another real exposure to toxins is the chemicals in our body care and personal care products. And 12-year-olds are using things that they should not be using. That's the trend. And so she came up to me and said, oh, well, everything comes from nature. Even these chemicals come from nature. So I had to tell her, honey, just like food, when it is ultra processed, becomes toxic. Even these chemicals, when they're ultra processed and they're denatured, they lose their original structure and the energy about them. And then when we are consuming it, they not only cause leaky gut, all toxins they have the potential to cause leaky gut. And when I say toxins, think about pesticides, artificial dyes, artificial flavors, and then too much sugar and salt, actually, and preservatives that are used, sodium metabisulfite. I actually saw there's a study many years ago published that showed that too much sugar and salt in junk food is enough to cause intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut. That's one effect. Then the other effect is that they can be direct immune toxins. Directly, they aggravate our immune system. And we see this mostly, I mean, unfortunately, we might get shut down, but vaccines are meant to trigger our immune system, and they trigger our immune system not because of the inactivated virus or bacteria, but because of the adjuvants like mercury, aluminum, and in COVID vaccines, of course, they used polyethylene glycol and polysorbate 80. Go back, and if you're using your Dove shampoo or Suave or any of these traditional products, you will see ethylene glycol and polysorbate 80 in your shampoo. And ask yourself, how can something that's in my shampoo go into my bloodstream? But they do that there. I can understand their logic. It's because they want to trigger your immune system. And what does it mean when something is triggering? Of course, they say we want to activate your immune system. I don't call it activation. I call it aggravation. We are not supposed to be in a state of immune aggravation. And then we are getting bombarded from the morning we wake up. Toothpaste, if it's not clean, that's an entry point for toxins. The third way that toxins can affect us is they can be direct endocrine disruptors. We have glyphosate, is estrogen mimicker, or actually it's one or the other. Atrazine, if glyphosate is estrogen mimicker, atrazine is androgen mimicker, or it's the other way around. I sometimes get confused with this. And we are seeing that these molecules are causing early menarche, which is actually not a good thing, not just psychologically and emotionally, but early menarche has been linked to early death and all kinds of diseases, from cancer to heart disease and all of that. And we are also seeing other endocrine disturbances, PCOS, endometriosis, and male infertility is also on the rise. I mean, actually, sperm count across the population has fallen down by more than 50%. So we are actually causing, so are there any other ways and they can be direct neurotoxins as well. Glyphosate can be a neurotoxin. Glyphosate is also a teratogen, meaning that it crosses the placental barrier, and it impacts the developing fetus. We also have to put in all psychiatric medications. Antidepressants do increase risk of autism and ADHD, anxiety, and depression. when a mother is exposed to it during her pregnancy. But I've also seen studies where they show that if the dad was an antidepressant or the mom was an antidepressant for up to 2 years before they got pregnant, that can have an impact. Obviously, that impact is lower than when there is active exposure to the developing fetus during pregnancy. And from all these studies, what I realized is zero is better. It's not less is better, it's actually zero is better. That's what I've, and the false premise of modern psychiatry is that, oh, there's nothing else we can do. That is the biggest lie. More than that, there is a neurochemical imbalance and antidepressants are the only thing that will work. An even bigger lie is the disconnection that we cause for patients. They are made to disconnect from their own minds, bodies, and souls, and also disconnection from their own innate wisdom and intuition. Birth control pills are another bigger talk. I mean, I saw another study that showed it's insane. When women are exposed to birth control pills, over the next 10 years, there is a 285% increase in hypothyroidism. And I talked about a neurotoxicity. Again, why? Because all of these chemicals, whether they're pesticides, dyes, or pharmaceuticals and fragrance molecules, they're all petrochemicals. They're all coming from the oil industry. And let me give another imagery for our patients, for our people that are signed in here. So, when crude oil is extracted from the ground and we extract gasoline, which is, it looks clear and all that stuff, right? What is remaining is that black, slushy, gunky stuff. Of course, your petroleum jelly, Vaseline comes from that. But also all of these other chemicals that we're talking about from the whole pharmaceutical industry is made out of petrochemicals, artificial dyes, preservatives, fragrance molecules, your polyethylene glycol, polysorbate AT. If you trace it back, it's coming from the crude oil, which, yes, is natural. But I mean, if I were to give you a glass of that black slushy crude oil, you're not going to drink it or lather it over your body. Mud packs, yes, but crude oil packs, no.
There is, for anyone who wants to understand the history of all this more, there's a very interesting report that you can look up called the Flexner Report,
Yes.
Flexnor. It's all about the history of how pharmaceuticals took over holistic medicine in our conventional care system around like the 50s, 60s timeframe. So if you look at medical textbooks from like before the 50s to compared to now, they're very different. And the petrochemical industry and oil industry actually had something to do with that. So I'll let you explore that on your own. But in all of this, I would love if we could talk a little bit about how you approach this with clients, because like I'm watching the chat here and like there's so many good comments and so many people have dealt with things like this. And I just I'll give like a little bit of an outline of like how something might play out for somebody. And then I'd love to hear your comments on it because, I saw somebody commenting, I tried anti-anxiety meds for my sleep and it super messed up my mental health. And then they also commented, oh, and then I have switched to carnivore diet because my gut is having a really hard time and it makes me feel better. And then someone else commented, if I take pregnenolone, it makes me feel better. And then they also commented, oh, and then my doctor put me on thyroid medication and then I stopped bruising as much. So we have this tendency, and we've been taught to see all these things as completely separate systems, but they're not. Separate systems. So usually the conundrum that happens is like somebody might get like a physical injury and then they might get what I call an emotional injury. Say you went through a breakup or a friendship fell apart or you lost your home or you lost your job. That's all an emotional injury. And then let's say that you had a little bit of mold in your house and then you got a chemical injury. And then all of these things add up into what's called allostatic load. And it can start with someone just feeling stressed and then they start feeling a little bit depressed. And when you're stressed out, you actually grow bad bacteria in your gut and you increase your own gut permeability from stress alone. Yeah. So now you're starting to deal with a little bit of leaky gut. You're starting to deal with a little bit of dysbiosis. This starts to affect the function of your immune system. Then your immune system is either underactivated from high levels of cortisol, or as your adrenals get incredibly tired, your immune system gets overactivated and your inflammation increases because you no longer have cortisol to control it. When your immune system goes down from the high levels of cortisol, it actually increases your susceptibility to things like infection. And you can start to get all these little micro infections like fungus in the gut or overgrowth of bad bacteria. Now your immune system is trying to take care of that. You're producing more and more stress hormones, and then your body gets tired and your adrenals get tired. And now you don't have as much cortisol to regulate your immune system. So your inflammation goes up. We were just talking earlier about how depression is correlated to inflammation in the brain. This is all the new research that's coming out. So now all of a sudden you have higher inflammation and a lower functioning immune system, and you have inflammation in the brain, and you're starting to feel kind of depressed, which also increases your anxiety, which then loops you back into being super stressed out and increasing the permeability more and perpetuating this entire cycle. And then let's say you get in a fender bender and all of a sudden you have an accident and you're really you're frustrated and depressed. And so you start eating junk food and you're like eating a lot of gluten. Well, gluten and the thyroid have a cross reaction. So gluten and Hashimoto's are highly related.
Correct.
And nobody really talks about this. And then they just put people on thyroid medication, and you're not addressing the mitochondria, which is what the thyroid acts on for energy. And so if your mitochondria aren't functioning, you're no longer going to have the energy to help your body heal in the first place. So you just keep going more and more downhill, and you just get put on these medications. That's basically like putting a Sharpie over a check engine light in your body. So if you are on these and you are dealing with them, they are really helpful at certain times, but your question should always come back to, why do I need this? Where did this come from in the first place? And it's rarely one event. It's usually like the last 1 to 10 years, somewhere in there, that this all kind of develops. And then all of a sudden you hit a threshold because you've reached your allostatic load, and then your health crashes, or you have autoimmune or something weird. There's a whole book about this by Gabor Mate called When the Body Says No. And it's pretty fascinating. And even you were saying like you weren't able to express yourself, so your body expressed it for you in your thyroid. So that's just like a little scenario of how people can get stuck in this and why it's not like there's something wrong with you. It's just all the pieces aren't being addressed. They're being addressed one by one, but the system isn't being addressed. Right. So I'd love if you'd share your opinion or any case studies that you want people to know about.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in a very reductionistic way, what you're describing, if you take it down to individual cell, it's a cell danger response. All of this, it's a stress, whether any kind of stress, physical, chemical, biological, psychological, spiritual.
Which, for anyone who doesn't know, that means that your cells enter a state where they literally cannot process nutrition.
Correct. And one of the things that happens with that is the cell signaling. So we had somebody talk about, pregnant alone, I'm taking this, or hormonal depression. And you mentioned that it's not just about, it's also the signaling. And ultimately the signaling is happening at the level of the cell membrane. So when the cell membrane gets disintegrated, which can happen, folks, with EMF toxicity, and we are bombarded with. So, I mean, when I talk like this, I know some people are, okay, we need all move to the mountains, Himalayas, and live in caves. No, that's not what it is. There are ways. It's not about abandoning technology. It's about respective use of technology. And we have to push industry. We have to push industry to create technology that is not harmful for us. So this will continue. I mean, faster and faster Gs and phones, we will be using them, but we have to push industry to keep in mind our well-being as well, the world's well-being. And when that right action, that's in yogic philosophy, we call it dharma. Anything that you do, you could be a soldier and kill people, but you could still do it from a dharmic consciousness, which is doing it for the greater good. In the same way, technology also has to be from a dharmic perspective. That idea of dharma, which is doing it for the greater good. And that is where we need to push industry to go. Right now, they're in very selfish, again, lower energy centers. We are seeing it play out even in the larger consciousness as well. Industry is stuck in the lower energy centers of greed and avarice and selfishness and survival mode. The world is abundant, universe is abundant. If they understand that, then they will go into this right consciousness. And then we will see technology. I mean, we're already seeing it. We have EMF blockers, we have supplement companies. And I'm so heartened to see young people cleaning up our oceans. And, so many of these conscious companies are coming up and industry is changing, and we need to support that. So having said that, cell danger response, but also from a very high perspective, from a spiritual perspective, and in the multitude of insults that you described in your example patient, actually happens in reality. So you were not describing something fictional. It does happen. People do undergo multiple insults like this, coming from all different angles. And that is just your higher self, your soul saying, wake up. You need to wake up and live your purpose. So from a spiritual perspective, that is what is happening. There is nobody, it's not about bad karma. Nobody's trying to punish you from past life or this life, or there is no God that is trying to punish you. It's just your higher soul getting you to wake up, to come in alignment, mind, body, and soul, so that you can live in a joyful, authentic state. So from a spiritual perspective, I see this play out everywhere. So, but how do I approach in my program? I explain to people it's diet, trauma, toxins. These are the three things. So diet, I say diet, but really what I mean is leaky gut. We need to fix the leaky gut. And trauma, as we discussed, I mean, I call it trauma, but that is really operating in the lower survival centers. That's what happens with any, and you can say trauma can be from psychological, physiological, chemical, all of these things. Ultimately, when they make us go into that survival mode, that's what I'm calling here. And the way to come out of that survival mode is by going inward, reflection, and becoming your own, and spiritual evolution, which happens only through self-awareness practices and meditation. And finally, detoxification. Actually, I should say diet, toxins, and trauma, because until and unless we address the leaky gut and the nutritional status and the detoxification pathways and help with detoxification, again, all of this can be done very, very easily. It doesn't take long. It does require commitment and focus on the part of people, patients, but when they're doing that, and then it's rinse and repeat. And the body heals very reliably. It's the mind and the soul where you have to practice. You have to practice self-love, self-worth. And there are certain meditations and techniques that I use. But when we do this rinse and repeat, until you get to healing, but it's not going to be, there is no destination there, because as you get better at this, life is such that we upgrade our video game, right? You get to the next level. But what happens is that once you go through this process, you become that surfer that is not afraid no matter how big a wave is. And when you surf those big waves, the joy and exhilaration that you feel is what you're going to feel in life as well. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to react in a negative way to situations. It's not about that. It's how quickly you come back to your equanimity. So I'm not perfect. I don't expect people to become perfect. No, perfection is the enemy of good. Yeah, it's not at all about perfection. But know that if you do 10%, your mind body system will respond by 20%. If you do 20%, so the gains accrue. And if you fall off the wagon, nothing bad happens. You just have to get back onto it. And you may see some symptoms come back, but it's about, again, training. It's about churning the wheels, keeping them oiled and churning. And once you view healing and life from this perspective, it becomes invigorating and challenging in a good way. It's not feeling burdened and victimized, and so your perspective and attitude, everything changes.
I
So
I compare ourselves often to like maintaining a high performing car. You don't maintain it
yes,
once and then you never have to touch it again. And yeah, you can go ahead and function and never maintain it. But if you drive it with the alignment off forever or dirty oil, like it's just not going to function as well. And if you don't correct those things and you just try to kind of like bandage them up, it's also not going to work. And so when we can view our health in this way, that's huge. And I love everything that you brought up about kind of the energetic body and the spiritual mind and the way that you're perceiving the world, because your brain is the strongest pharmacy you will ever have. It sends
yes,
out all the signals that controls all the chemistry in your body. And if we are focused on everything that might go wrong, more of that's going to show up.
yeah.
And so that is where, like the work that Dr. Tummala does, or like even I do some like subconscious reprogramming techniques, which I learned because it was a tool that was lacking in my practice that people needed. And so it's a way
And I
that you can
learned
start to
about
transform.
mold in
Yes.
getting to know you. I learned about mold. So that's the beauty of the collaboration too. Yeah.
Yes, I love the collaboration. And in all of this, it's shifting perspective for people of, instead of like, I am afraid to interact in groups because it causes me anxiety, we can shift that perspective to, I am excited to have group interactions because I know it will heal old wounds. And if we can start to just approach things with this positive approach, and it's not just like saying positive affirmations to yourself, it's working with someone to shift your perspective on how you're perceiving your life, and then you're no longer stuck in that anxiety, like lower energy state. So I think these things are huge, and there's so many other tools out there, and I'd love to like also hear your opinion on any of the current events going on. Like there's quite a movement to bring anything from just transforming therapy into something like somatic therapy, or even bringing in like things like retreats or experiential events, or even things like psychedelics to help people relax their mind enough and take a break from focusing on all of their problems to reboot and reset their neurological pathways. And then, we also have the current events of what we're dealing with in our world. So I'd love to hear any of your opinions on those.
Retreats, workshops. Again, I think we are social beings. What our brain develops in relation to connection and social engagement. I mean, many studies, orphanage studies, and child rearing studies have clearly shown that attachment leads to authenticity. So secure attachment is what leads to authentic, joyful beings. And so as adults, when we don't have that attachment, authenticity blessing, but we can always recreate that. So retreats, workshops, healing programs, all of these things, somatic reprocessing, absolutely, because when the experience of life becomes too much for our brain to hold, it actually puts it in the body. And so any of these somatic reprocessing therapies, brain spotting, EMDR, they all will help. But again, remember, as healers, we are placebo facilitators. So if you don't believe in any of this modality, please don't do it. But see where there is that connection for you. And you mentioned psychedelics as well. Psychedelics, yes. Psychedelics, there is a caution there, because it's, psychedelics are like, rather than kind of slowly getting into this process, it's like, rather than, what's the analogy that I want to give? When you take a psychedelic, instead of opening the door and walking through it, it's like breaking open the whole wall and experiencing the whole of it.
Like taking the elevator up, opening the doors, getting a glimpse of where you can go, closing the doors and going back down, but it's your responsibility afterwards to learn how to take the stairs. But sometimes if you've been stuck,
I like that analogy. Yeah, I do like that. And also it really depends on, I mean, I would only do psychedelics with the shaman.
Yes,
with an indigenous
like a facilitator makes all the difference in the world. Like it's a completely different experience than trying to do something alone.
Correct. Yeah. So there's a lot of potential for misuse. And again, there are many roads that lead to Rome. Meditation can be just as powerful as psychedelics, because ultimately a lot more without the side. Actually, I shouldn't say even meditation too. In some people, some advanced forms of meditation, when a person cannot handle it, if the system is not ready for it, we do see psychosis. So spirituality and psychosis are two sides of the same coin. So this Kundalini activation techniques, which are becoming very popular, but again, the facilitator, the guru, is very important. And in the absence of a guru who knows what they're doing, this Kundalini activation can lead to psychosis. Same can happen with psychedelics as well, especially overuse of, I think it was Aubrey Marcus. He was talking about, he's been on so many psychedelic trips, and he said his dad had introduced him, and his dad also did a lot of psychedelics. And then he said, but eventually my dad got diagnosed with schizophrenia, but that has nothing to do with his psychedelics. No, dude, you're in denial. There is a pathway that excessive psychedelic use can give rise to, because like I said, it's like, are you getting this intro to this to your consciousness in a small, incremental, easily digestible manner? Or, it's like, are you drinking from the tap, or are you drinking from a fire hose? It literally, that is the difference between the two.
The facilitators and having an integration specialist before and after is incredibly important. But again, this is just one tool among many, just like you mentioned, like EMDR, like yoga,
brain spotting,
any of these, like they're all just tools, and it's about finding what's right for you. And you might find a tool that works for a little while, and then you might grow out of it, and it might be
Yes.
time to search for the next tool. So there's an evolution in the process as well.
Absolutely. And even with meditative practices, I've tried different things and finally I mean, at this stage in life, as you mentioned, I love Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditations because I've had the most mystical experiences with that. And that's me. That's me. I
Me too.
gravitate towards experiencing that mystical facets of life, and I come back more enriched and with so many more. My intuition has developed because of that, but like I said earlier, I used to be a functioning, anxious, traumatized person. It was through his work that I've been able to kind of bring that joy and authenticity into my life as well. But there are many roads that lead to Rome. Find what sits with you. And yeah, I think that your knowing is very important. It cannot be a passive process. So be an active member, be an active collaborator, and only if it resonates with you, you do it.
I think our society has trained us to be victims in our healthcare because of how we used to glorify medical professionals, when really, like, we're here talking to you because we want to empower you to ask questions and be your
Yes.
own health authority and be an active participant in your health. Like, we're kind of at the point where, like, you can't just be saved anymore. You really have to learn how to kind of save yourself, but do it in a way where you're not woe is me at the same time that you're doing it. Like, it needs to come from a place of empowerment and understanding your own resiliency and knowing that you've made it through every single hardship that you've been through up until now. So you have the resiliency to do that. And that's why I wanted to do these things. But we all need help sometimes. So if you were directing
Yes.
people towards looking for a mental health professional or asking the right questions, or even if they wanted to work with you, what advice would you give them?
So there is no savior. We have to be our own savior, but in the context of a community. Find your
Yes,
tribe. And for us women, I shouldn't say only for women, even men thrive in communities, and so do we. We
everybody.
need so everybody. This journey of self actualization or finding that healing, you cannot separate the two. Is a personal journey, no doubt about it. But it is best done with the support of a tribe and a community where you can let your guard down. So that's going to be important. And then also, when you have that tribe, and Mark Hyman's studies have clearly shown when they took a whole bunch of people in a church and changed everybody's diet together, everybody got better. But when you try to do that on an individual basis, it's an uphill battle. But I think, hello, I think I've
Oh, yeah,
lost you.
sorry. For some reason, it dropped out for a moment, but you were talking about
Yeah.
Mark Hyman's studies and changing all the diets at once worked really well. But if you're doing it by yourself, it can be hard. So this is why it can be really fun to interact with an online community. And I know you run one. So
Yeah.
if people did want to connect with you or they weren't sure where to start searching, where would you direct them?
So my website, that's trinergyhealth.com. There's a contact form, and I get immediately notified. So that's one way that they can connect through Instagram as well. They can leave me a message here. And my office number is 262-955-6601. I do want to mention that I work with patients all over the country like you do. And I'm licensed in the state of Wisconsin. So anybody that is in Wisconsin, I can even manage their medications. If they're outside of Wisconsin, I work like a health coach, mental health coach, which means that you still need somebody local if you're on medications, but I can guide you and that local person to help do things that are in your best interest. And the Trinergy Health, and my office number is 262-955-6601. So,
Amazing. I love these conversations with you, and
cheers.
it's every time we get to go down like all these other avenues. So I hope this was helpful for everybody listening. And for anybody who has questions, like, this will be posted on my feed. I'm going to make her a collaborator. It'll be posted on her feed. Ask us questions in the comments. We'll answer your questions. Reach out to us if you want to ask questions, or if you want to work with us. As she mentioned, like, if you are in the state where we're licensed, that's when we can be mostly work with you directly. But if you are in another location, then we work more educationally in collaboration with the other practitioners that you have on your team as a third set of eyes. So we Love you. And that's why we're here. We want you to feel
Yes.
empowered in your health. And please feel free to reach out to us. Any last thoughts you want to share before we sign off?
I would say, one, yes, it's actually very easy to heal. I mean, yes, the complexity, leave that to us. That's our job, is to understand the complexity and provide the directions. But it is really very easy to heal.
Yes. And the last thing I'll say, I saw someone comment, the sad thing is the cost of help. Yeah, our healthcare system is challenging for that these days, but it is the reason that we do this, right? We just spoke for an hour and this is free education for you. I have an entire YouTube channel. It's all located on my social media as well, of just talking to other functional medicine practitioners and teaching you all the stuff that we'd be teaching you in appointments anyway that we want you to know. And a lot of the time you can apply this to your life and feel substantially better very quickly. But sometimes you need some extra help, and that is when you reach out, and that's why we're here. So please know that there are resources that are free, and then there are resources that are less expensive. And so what you can look for is, like, go to my YouTube channel. It's just Depth Wellness, DEPTH Wellness, and check that out. All the practitioners on there, including Dr. Tummala, are people that I love and trust and believe in what they're doing. And then from there, you can also do, like, we have pre-recorded courses, and you can watch those courses on your own, which go a little bit deeper. And then we have group programs, and you can participate in the group programs, which are substantially less expensive than one-to-one care. One-to-one care is always going to be the most expensive thing, but I want you to know that there's, like, these steps along the way that you can take that can match you wherever you're at. And sometimes you get to this step and you don't even need these steps. So just start with exploration, start with educating yourself. That YouTube channel is a gold mine, and Dr. Tummala has a bunch of her own resources. So go to her, like, click on her name, Trinergy Health, go to her website, check out that, and just know that we're here for you in a variety of ways.
I completely second what Dr. Christine is saying. And Christine, I think you've been much ahead in this game. You have tons of wonderful courses. I don't have any courses, but I do have a free ebook on my second website, which is psychiatry2.com. That's a really good place to start. And really, I mean, you may not need, herbs and supplements may hasten your recovery, but if you just stick with the diet and the self and the meditation practices, you are going to see healing even with that as well. And I think there was something else that I wanted to actually add, that it's actually much more costly to be sick and to be in illness. That people, no, it's not about that. That's a limiting fear, that you'll not be able to afford what you need. But there's everything is actually, it's a mindset. So I would say, even, look at that mindset as well, because it's much more costly to be in sickness and in illness.
It doesn't matter how much money you have if you don't have your health, and I speak that from experience. And there are other resources out there. So like, even I work with a program out of New York called Linden House, and we train health advocates. So we train people to help you in your health journey, and that's advocates, not necessarily practitioners. So there's different levels of people that you can interact with, and just know that these resources are available. So if you're curious, you have more questions, reach out. But I want to make sure to honor Dr. Tummala's time, because she's very busy. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and I look forward to our next chat.
Me too. Take care.